This is Coach Ellis Mass coming at you from beautiful Parkland, Florida. And we're here today to talk about how we create sustainable change. How do we drive change within our organization? And more importantly, or just as importantly, how do we make it last? This is really designed, just a couple quick concepts to talk about bringing change to a business, although these principles apply to pretty much any kind of change, including a personal change that you might want to make. So I hope you find this useful and interesting. As I mentioned, my name is Ellis Mass. I've been doing this for a long time, working for a variety of companies in a variety of industries and delivering outstanding business results. That's what I do. That's what I still do as a business coach. I spend some time teaching at Broward College down here in Florida. And in addition, I'm a certified business coach with an organization called Focal Point. What is Focal Point, you might ask? It's a group created by a guy named Brian Tracy, whom you might have heard of, a pretty famous guy. He's created a ton of content, tools, and systems. And although we all independently own and run our own practices, there are about 200 of us or more across the U.S. and Canada, and a bunch more in other countries around the globe. We all are our own practice owners, but we all pull from this common group of tools, content, and systems, and we have each other as our network. So we bring a lot of value to our clients. I do a number of things. My quick commercial here. I do some group coaching online for a bunch of clients who have the same interests and want to do things together as a group. I also do VIP private coaching. I tend to do a little bit more of that because most of my clients have specialized issues and things that they're working on. So we really focus on spending time specifically on their issues rather than with the group. I also do workshops and seminars, kind of like this one. I do them online. I do webinars. I also do keynotes and other kinds of things in person. So let's start for today. The real question, I guess there are two questions that we need to ask ourselves. The first is how to initiate change. So I'm going to show you something that just about all of us at Focal Point use. It's a concept called Gleischer's formula. Gleischer's formula for change. You may have heard of it. It was created by a guy named David Gleischer back in the 1960s, and it was updated and sort of modernized in the 1980s. So even that's a while ago. This is time tested. It's been around for a while, and this is just a little bit of a mathematical concept to describe the conditions necessary to create change. You can see there that there's a mathematical equation on the screen, 4 variables, d times v times f greater than r. So let's define those variables real quick, and then we'll talk about what this all means. The first variable, the d, stands for dissatisfaction. In order for there to be change, we've got to have some level of dissatisfaction with the status quo. If we're not at all dissatisfied, or conversely, if we're completely satisfied, there's really no reason for change, and certainly there's going to be no impetus for us to change anything. But if we're dissatisfied, we create a condition where there might be a possibility for change. But dissatisfaction by itself is not enough. There also needs to be a vision, that's the V, a vision for what that future state might look like. If we're dissatisfied with our present, but we don't really have a clear vision about the future or what we want, then it's actually still very difficult to get to that change. In addition to those two things, the whole thing can fall apart if we don't have F, first steps. If we have some clear first steps, we know what actions to take today to start to drive us down the path towards that vision. We've got some possibility of getting some momentum and getting started. If we don't know what those first steps are and those aren't clear in our minds, it's going to be very, very difficult to get on that path and even achieve that vision. So any one of these things is missing or very low, change is really, really difficult to take place. Not to mention the fact that even though we may really want change, there's something working against us, and that's that R, that resistance. So there's resistance to any change. Change is difficult, necessary, but difficult. It's tough for us to adjust sometimes. As human beings, we get comfortable with the status quo, even if it's not serving us that well. Inertia sets in. It's really easy to kind of become comfortable with something, even though we should be uncomfortable with it. So this resistance can take many forms. Sometimes it might mean, hey, I don't really have access to the resources I need to make this change right now. Sometimes it may be negativity from people around us, whether, again, in a business or in a personal context. People being negative, you can't do it, that's impossible. That really adds to the resistance. It makes change more difficult. It makes it more difficult for us to pull together the resolve to change. Often it's fear. That resistance is fear. There are some objective, we always have lack of resources. We always have limited resources. But more often than not, resistance is completely internal. Maybe it's even compounded by the things that we have coming at us out externally, but it's all ultimately internal. We are all responsible for this. Our inner dialogue, our inner monologue, we create the resistance. Oh, maybe I can't do it, etc. So in order for change to take place, this is just for change to begin at all, we've got to have dissatisfaction. We've got to have vision. We've got to have first steps. And the product of those three things multiplied together has got to be greater than that resistance that's going to be in our way. Otherwise, change won't happen. And just if you all remember from your grade school math, anything times zero is, of course, zero. So if dissatisfaction's not there, if vision's not there, if first steps are not there, even if the other two are extremely high, that zero is going to multiply everything to zero. Or an extremely low fraction or percentage is going to multiply those down into a very low number, and it's going to be very, very difficult to overcome that resistance. That is Gleicher's formula for change. That is really what we talk about in terms of getting change initiated. That goes for your personal life. That also goes for your business. But then the question becomes, if we get that change started, which was hard enough because we have to have all those conditions present to make that change happen, how do we sustain change? Because I'm sure you can relate to this. This is a near universal thing too. We often get change started. So we've overcome all those initial obstacles to start that change. We've satisfied all the requirements of Gleicher's formula. But sustaining that change becomes more difficult, especially depending on what our behavior style is. Sometimes we're not as regimented as other people, and we tend to lose steam and lose momentum. And even though we get off to a pretty decent start, we fail to be able to sustain that change. So Gleicher's formula doesn't really cover that. So instead, we're going to take a look at a model created by another brilliant business coach, a guy named Ellis Mass. You might know him. His 4 keys to sustaining change. I need to brand this better. This is something that I've developed over the years in terms of working with some of my clients. That how do we create change, but how do we also sustain change? And I know I have a lot of branding experts. I kind of consider myself a branding guy, but I have a lot of smart branding people that are probably watching this. So if you have some great ideas for how to brand this for me after the video, please let me know. They're all going to start with A, so maybe it's the 4 A's to sustaining change. And the 4 A's are accountability, authority, alignment, and agency. And we're going to define each one of these and then talk about how they work. So let's start with accountability. This is probably the simplest to understand. We need commitment to hold one another and ourselves accountable. If we're talking about an organization, a group, it's a bunch of people. But even if you're a solopreneur, guess what? You've got to hold yourself accountable for that change and create some kind of a process or mechanism to continue to hold yourself accountable and have that be top of mind. If you don't want to do it entirely on your own, find an accountability partner, find a leader of the effort who's going to take some charge of that, or find a coach. I volunteer, so give me a call. But you got to find someone, seriously, that's going to help you retain accountability. And that's something we do within Focal Point. As coaches, as independent business owners, we help each other out. So you got to find an accountability partner or a coach to keep you accountable and keep that change sustained, and make sure that those expectations for what success look like is clear up front. Make sure that your communications between one another are very clear. Make sure that the clear follow-through is laid out. That's that vision. That's where the Gleicher's formula comes back in. The first step's great, and have that vision. Know where you're going to. Begin with the end in mind, as Stephen Covey says. The second A, authority. And this is probably pretty self-explanatory also. The boss or decision maker needs to be on board. If the boss is not on board, change is not going to be sustainable. You may, as an organization, be able to get some change started, but at the end of the day, eventually, if you don't have the support of senior management, if you don't have support of the business owner, it's just not going to last. You really need to make sure in advance that you've lined up that kind of support, or that you have a plan to go get that support. And by the way, a lot of businesses that I work with have multiple decision makers, whether it's senior partners in a law firm, or whether it's co-owners of a construction business or a dental practice or a medical practice, you name it. Sometimes you've got some decision makers or owners on board, but not all of them. And that's a problem too. Eventually, that's going to create some issues. So you really have to have those tough conversations up front and make sure that the authority is there. You have that support from your leadership to go. But those two things aren't enough to sustain change. We also need that third A, alignment. So we talked about our leadership level, but really the entire team needs to be aligned to make that change sustainable. If you've got people out in the trenches that are actually doing the hard work, actually meeting with customers or doing the operational stuff that you need to do to have that business working and humming, they need to be on board too. They need to understand what's expected of them. They need to really be briefed, and they need to take some ownership at all levels of the organization for making that change take place. We need to make sure that that alignment is happening at a normal time before the change is needed, particularly even when we're hiring people. Let's make sure that we're hiring people that are going to find alignment with our way of doing things. And how do we do that? Well, hopefully your organization has a well-articulated purpose, values, mission, vision. These are all the absolute must-haves for a strong strategic plan. These are things that don't really change a lot year to year. Our purpose, our values, our mission, and our vision, but you do want to make sure that they're up to date and that they're extremely well articulated and that everybody in your organization understands what they are. When you're hiring people, make sure that you're hiring people that share those values. Make sure that you're hiring people that can get on board with that purpose. Then, whatever change you need to make within your organization, whether it's improved performance, whether it's pivoting to a new segment or a new marketplace, it's going to be much easier to make that change because they're already bought into those things. So you got to have that alignment. Otherwise, again, it's going to be really difficult to sustain that change, even if you move the needle at the beginning. You need the rank and file supporting you with this. The last A is agency. And no, I don't mean like the ad agency. I don't mean the Central Intelligence Agency. It's the other definition of agency. Definition 2 in Merriam-Webster, the capacity, condition, or state of acting or of exerting power. You have to have agency. You have to have ownership and take that by the horns and make that change yourself. Here's a good example of that. And we'll use a personal example. How many people have ever been involved in a fitness program or a weight loss program? Some weight loss programs, some fitness programs are very prescriptive. They give you, let's say, prepackaged food. You're going to have them at these particular times, etc. It's good to follow a system. You can definitely make a change with that. But how about sustainable change? Where we tend to have problems, where things tend to fall apart is, hey, after you've made that change, after you've, let's say, lost a bunch of weight or gotten way more fit because you've done a really good job with that, if you go back to Glacier's formula, the D, the dissatisfaction, kind of disappears. So the reason for change kind of goes away, and we tend to fall by the wayside a little bit. And you know what? If we just got the prepackaged stuff and someone doled it out for us and someone gave us our plan and we didn't really understand it very well, we didn't know really what was going into it, we were just kind of taking stuff for granted and doing it, we might make a change. But once the conditions have changed, once our dissatisfaction levels change, we don't really have the knowledge or the ownership to make that a reoccurring thing. Instead, what if we are on a program where, we have to provide our meals. We have to create our own meals. We have to do all of our cooking on Sunday night and dole out our portions for the week. And we know exactly what's going in and how much protein and how many carbs and what kind of carbs are the right thing. And we learn those things by doing those things over and over again. That creates a more sustainable change. It's really that taking responsibility of driving that change ourselves, taking that ownership. And again, in an organization, this is at all levels of the organization. We can't just say, Big Brother will do this for me. We've got to, each individually and as a group, be actively involved and engaged in that change if we want it to be sustainable. So here's what it looks like visually. We just have an overlap of those 4 elements: accountability, authority, alignment, and agency. And quite frankly, it is really difficult and rare to be able to sustain all 4. And that's why change is very difficult to sustain. Even if we're able to make change happen, which is not easy in its own right, that's why things tend to lose momentum. What it's going to require is focus and effort to sustain all four of those things at the same time. We've got to be having conversations explicitly. We've got to be very clear about our expectations, and this has to be top of mind. We have to make this a priority if we want to create a change in our organization or in our personal lives for that matter. So I'd like for you guys to think about all this, and as a next step, if there is a change that you're looking to make in your organization or in your life, start by using Gleischer's formula to enable that change. And if you look at that formula and with your particular change, if there are areas in that formula that are either low or zero, you're never going to be able to overcome that resistance. So work on that. If you don't know what your first steps are, that's probably been the stumbling block. And that's what you're going to have to change if you're going to overcome that resistance. Maybe your first steps are very clear, but that vision is a little hazy. Sharpen that. Do that in writing, and you'll be able to make that change. And then, for lack of a better branding, I'm going to call it this: use Mass's 4A's for sustained change to ensure that the change that you make is sustainable. You got to make sure that all four of those elements are in place at the beginning, or at least you have a plan to go get them. If you don't have that alignment, for example, how are you going to go get that? That's got to be something that you're addressing. If you'd like, I am here to help you implement your needed changes. So feel free to email me. I do this all the time. Feel free to email me your organization's most needed change. Tell me what you're thinking about. I'll email you back. Or if you want to talk about it, you can book a free 20-minute call on my calendar down below, coachellismass.youcanbook.me. Feel free to book that. If there's an open slot, grab it, and I'll have a conversation for you. If I'm full up, you may have to look out a couple of weeks. But for now, anyway, feel free to book that, and I would love to have that conversation with you. And hey, we may decide that we might want to have a longer conversation after that. But let's start with the 20 minutes. And remember, whatever you're going to be outstanding, as always. Thanks very much. It's really been a pleasure.